Lithography, again, absolutely integral step in the wafer manufacturing front-end process to make the chips themselves. ASML dominates that market. In this new packaging part of the market, Onto Innovation is the leader in lithography.
Let's talk about Onto Innovation. Is Onto Innovation the next ASML? Good question.
Maybe it is. Hopefully ASML doesn't need any introduction. Totally get it if Onto Innovation needs an intro. Maybe we should start with ASML. Casey, tell us what ASML does.
ASML manufactures the equipment that makes the most leading edge advanced logic chips. You can see in this chart, lithography, part of the semiconductor wafer fab equipment market segmentation. This chart provided by Applied Materials. All the way on the left, you see that purple bar. Lithography is a large portion of wafer fab equipment. ASML, by far and away, the leading manufacturer of that equipment.
And you used a key word here, Casey, wafer fab equipment. Wafers being, of course, the silicon-based substrates that you see people in lab bunny suits holding, and those things eventually get cut up into chips. There has been a tremendous amount of research and development poured into wafer development, shrinking down the transistors, those gates that control the ones and zeros that are the basis of software. Wafer fab equipment, fast approaching a $100 billion per year sub-industry of the semiconductor market. ASML, one of the top beneficiaries of that trend. Probably no introduction needed here, in no small part because of this stock chart. Total return for ASML over the last decade alone at well over 1,500%. I'd say that's a pretty darn good investment. Hopefully, you agree with us on that. If not, I don't know what direction to point you to.
There's no help for you.
Now, maybe we should back up here and take a higher level view of the semiconductor industry flow. Casey, you made this chart last year. We use it on every single video. ASML fits into wafer fab and packaging equipment. The section there in the middle, we call it a critical choke point in the industry. They provide the equipment that IDMs and third-party wafer fabs need to actually manufacture chips. So let's back up here. Before we talk about the next ASML, let's talk about what's happening with these semiconductor manufacturers themselves. A lot of innovation going on, right?
The top names in the foundry business, TSMC, Intel, and Samsung, are all leading the charge to research and design innovative ways to make more efficient chips. The wafer level itself has been getting most of the research and development dollars. You can see this slide from TSMC talking about wafer on wafer stacking. That's just one example of many of the innovations that have been made in semiconductor wafers. Now, more research and development is getting spent on packaging. Why is packaging so important?
There's numerous reasons why that is. One of them is it's just getting really, really expensive to continue to shrink down the size of the features on the wafers themselves. Manufacturing those really, really tiny transistors and other features on the wafer before they get diced up and then packaged into a total computing or electronic system. So as that's getting more expensive and more complicated, manufacturers like TSMC, like Intel, are looking for the next lowest hanging fruit. And that's where packaging comes in. As you said, wafers themselves have gotten all the attention. Now we're talking about packaging, which is a very, very relatively tiny part of the manufacturing industry. Specifically today, when we're going to talk about the next ASML, the next big lithography play, we're going to be talking about the packaging substrate. We have an arrow pointing at it here. Oftentimes you'll hear companies like TSMC and Intel call this the RDL interposer layer. RDL, in this case, standing for redistribution layer. So historically, this is made out of an organic compound, and little lines are etched into these things and then filled in with copper. This delivers the electricity and form the interconnect layers between the different chips. Just like the wafers themselves are built of multiple layers to carry electricity throughout the different stacks of a chip. Well, this packaging layer is now getting some attention. It's getting shrunk down. The layers are getting smaller. Those little copper interconnects are getting smaller. We're now approaching just a few microns in dimension for the most advanced packaging layer. And so companies like TSMC and Intel and their chip design customers are in this race to figure out how to increase the performance of that packaging before it's ultimately diced up and stuck on the actual circuit board. In these particular schematics here provided by TSMC, that's the big substrate there at the bottom.
Traditionally, when we think about packaging, we're thinking about a semiconductor being placed on the PCB board, the circuit board, and that's the packaging portion. But what we're talking about in this video is actually the packaging that goes on the semiconductor wafer. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah. And let's maybe break this down a little bit. This is very high level because there are a lot of different steps involved with this. There's a lot of different processes. We'll provide a link in the description below to a series of YouTube videos from a professor that explains all of these different methodologies in technical details. Put very simply, you're right. So right now, where we're at, when it comes to advanced packaging, it's happening at the wafer level. The semiconductor wafer, the most advanced ones, have a diameter of roughly 300 millimeters, and the packaging is going directly between those two things and then diced up and stuck on the printed circuit board. But these companies like TSMC and Intel and others are starting to realize that, hey, let's take the wafers with the chips on it, and instead of packaging it on another circular wafer, let's maybe stick those chips on a rectangular wafer. This is where some leading edge innovation is currently happening, that middle square. But in the coming years, we're now looking at the industry making a jump to larger packages, larger squares that can handle multiple wafers worth of chips. And as we make this jump, we have two things happening here. We have just a geometry problem being solved. These companies are investing in new equipment that can handle square rather than just the traditional circle. And with that jump in shape, there are now novel materials that can be used as the packaging layer. One of those is getting rid of the more traditional organic materials used for packaging the chips and making the jump into something more stable, something more higher performance, glass. Intel's been talking a lot about this, especially in the last year.
So, how would glass be an improvement over what's being currently used? You said organic materials.
Specifically, maybe I should say a glass core. It seems that some of these substrates are still going to be a mix of the organic materials, polymers, and there's going to be a glass core inside. But it seems that the glass can be shrunk down more. It can also handle those copper interconnects getting smaller and smaller, let's say smaller than 3 microns in feature size. This is a closer picture of Intel's tests on these larger panel level packaging substrates. And you can see the individual chips packaged next to each other. Because we have a new novel material, they're able to make these panels much bigger, doubling the width and the height of these panels. Now they can handle 4 wafers worth of chips on them instead of just so, yet another increase in potential yield as we move to this new substrate. Now, there's a lot of manufacturing innovation that needs to take place to be able to handle these chips. AMD has been talking about making this jump to new glass substrate, panel level packaging, but companies like AMD, NVIDIA, and others are going to need companies like TSMC and Intel to fine tune the manufacturing process to get this thing right. Maybe by 2025, 2026, we start getting the newest, latest, and greatest leading edge AI data center products utilizing this manufacturing process.
Now you may be wondering, why are we talking about this in the first place? This is where we need to talk about Onto Innovation, because they are one of the companies that manufactures the equipment to make these new substrates.
That's exactly right. So these new glass substrates, you may have seen this in the news. Here's one headline from Semi Engineering. Earlier this year, it was announced that a division of South Korea's SK Group Another one of their companies is SK Hynix, which makes high bandwidth memory. But another one of their subsidiaries got a $75 million grant from the US CHIPS Act to build a new facility to make these glass substrates. They have some pictures and a little bit of marketing material that shows what that looks like and how those glass substrates can be used in new fan-out packaging methods to cram more chips together and to increase the ultimate performance of those chips before they get ultimately installed into a computing system.
In the past, chip packaging was often handled by an OSAT, an outsourced semiconductor assembly and test provider. We've spoken about Amkor Technology as well as ASE Group, Foxconn, Jabil. You may recognize some of these names, but IDMs and chip fabs are starting to encroach on this semiconductor assembly part of the industry. Looking at our semiconductor industry flowchart, when we're talking about IDMs and chip fabs and contract manufacturers, they both have to get equipment from the wafer fab and packaging equipment companies that we have called the Fab Five, as well as some others like Onto Innovation.
That's why we call the wafer fab and assembly equipment providers a critical choke point. If there's an arms race heating up between the IDMs and the fabs and maybe some of the OSATs as well for this new packaging market, who's going to be the biggest beneficiary? Well, at the beginning of that process, as all the companies purchase and install new equipment, you have to start with the Fab Five. So our last video last week, we talked about applied materials and one new process step in chip packaging. Check out that video. A few weeks ago, we also talked about BE Semiconductor. It is the largest pure play in chip packaging manufacturing equipment. And a few weeks prior to that, we talked about another important step in chip packaging, and it's metrology and process diagnostic and control. KLA of the Fab Five, of course, the leader in that part of the industry. But there's a new breed of companies that kind of gobble up that little remnant of the market share above KLA in gray, in metrology and process diagnostics and control. Onto Innovation, Nova, and Camtech. The last time we talked about Onto Innovation, we talked about the metrology, but we skipped one of their products. Or I should say, maybe we mentioned it very briefly and then moved on.
As you saw on that last chart from Applied Materials, most of the equipment that Onto Innovation provides is related to metrology and process diagnostic and control. However, they do have that one piece of equipment there you see under advanced packaging that we have highlighted, the jet step lithography machine. Notice on the bottom of this slide, you see that little red dot. It says new penetration in the last 2 years next to jet step lithography. This press release just from last week showed that Onto Innovation is suggesting the JetStep as well as the Firefly as a total solution for these new glass substrate panels.
You called out the point about there being new penetration of these products. What this means is not that the JetStep X500 lithography machine and the Firefly G3 metrology system are new, but both of them are getting used in new ways by manufacturers for new process steps. So this is the slide that we used a few weeks ago when we talked about Onto Innovation. Think of these two systems, Firefly G3 for inspection and metrology, and the JetStep X500 lithography machine as two parts of a cohesive whole that Onto Innovation is marketing to manufacturers, not for the wafers for chips, but for the actual packaging, those new square-shaped packages that chips are getting installed on.
When you've thought about lithography, it's synonymous with ASML because that is the lithography onto semiconductor wafers is their primary market. When we're talking about lithography for chip packaging, we can think about Onto Innovation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is a generic slide. We shared this earlier this year. These process steps are very high level, but they're actually used throughout the process at various steps, specifically that dicing and packaging step, traditionally a relatively simple step in the process after the wafer was made and diced into chips. got stuck on a circuit board, not much attention paid to it. But now dicing and packaging is actually getting some of the same process steps as the traditional front end wafer process. Deposition, lithography, etch, and clean with metrology used throughout. And so what we're talking about here is not the chips on the top layer of the sandwich, but the actual packaging underneath them, the RDL interposer. Some of these now made up of glass. And to etch those copper fill lines, a lot of these advanced manufacturers using lithography to print a picture of that circuitry onto the substrate itself before the chips get packaged on top of it.
Are there any other companies that are doing this with lithography for advanced packaging?
Yes, this is really interesting. So lithography, again, absolutely integral step in the wafer manufacturing front end process to make the chips themselves. ASML dominates that market. In this new packaging part of the market, Onto Innovation is the leader in lithography. That JetStep system has been around for a while, and Onto has developed some capabilities that allows them to be able to scan those square-shaped substrates. Another competitor in this part of the lithography market is Canon. Think of often Canon as being a distant second place behind ASML, developing some of their own unique lithography methods for the front end process. They actually are in the back end process as well, in the packaging process. But late last year, Applied Materials announced this new partnership with a very small business in Japan, Ushio, that provides lithography light sources. This new partnership addressing advanced packaging lithography equipment. This Applied Materials machinery is not new, but the partnership between the two definitely is. This panel level packaging is a very, very small niche in the market at this point. Wafer on wafer packaging is still what's predominantly used at this point, but new experimentation happening right now, and panel or square shaped packaging substrates are going to be a very fast growing part of the semiconductor manufacturing industry over the course of the next 5 years.
With all this new development, Onto Innovation makes a lot of sense. This has been one of our favorite stocks in the last year that we've chose to add to our portfolio. Do you think it still has a lot of room to run?
It certainly could. It's been an epic run so far. Onto Innovation, as we've covered in our past videos, is the product of a merger between two small businesses back in 2019. We made our initial purchase in early 2023 when we were still in the midst of the bear market, in the depths of the semiconductor industry downturn. The stock has rallied since then. It shot out of our small cap basket portfolio just because of that stock price performance, and it is now a fairly significant position in our portfolio as a result. Check out our last video on this. I think we still ultimately consider this maybe a mid cap at this point, because by traditional metrics, just simply looking at the market cap in isolation, Onto Innovation is definitely a mid cap stock. But if you look at it compared to the industry leaders, KLA in metrology, ASML and lithography, Onto Innovation is tiny. So this is definitely one that, while the position itself has become a significant part of our portfolio, we still kind of judge it as part of our small cap portfolio.
Mhm.
And so we're interested to see how earnings pan out here in Q2 2024 as management has said they're about ready to return to growth mode, to see what the trajectory might be in the next few years, especially for that panel level lithography equipment. Casey, I know this always begs the question when we have videos like this. Someone's going to ask, are you buying? And if so, how?
Always a great question from our viewers. And for us personally, we did add to our position last year. We haven't added any more this year. It's probably a pretty good DCA candidate. But being that this company is what we consider a company that we put in our small cap basket, the position should be kept small at this point and just built up naturally over time in your portfolio. At least that's our take.
And check out, again, the last video on Onto Innovation, where we talk a bit more about valuation. On a trailing 12-month basis, the stock looks very expensive. On a forward-looking basis, it looks more reasonable, but not knowing what the trajectory of growth is going to be in the next couple of years, it could be a screaming value, or it could be a very expensive stock still that's going to experience some pretty wild swings in volatility. Don't get too excited, but also take a look at this.
You could be a little excited. We'll be back soon with more earnings releases. We have Air Test Systems this week as well as ASML. So make sure you come back for more at Chipstock Investor.